I'd like to introduce Sherry Cardinal, also known as Sherry Miskosikwe. Sherry is a LCSW DAAETS, has been licensed clinical social worker since 1978. She holds private practice credentials currently in Maine and previously in Texas for 38 years. She also holds a designation as a diplomat, American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress for her contributions and services in the field. The focus of her practice has been treating post-traumatic stress injury, depression, anxiety, mood disorders, with an emphasis on critical incident stress management for first responders, military, and Indigenous communities. Sherry has developed and implemented several social service agencies and programs during her career. The Fort Bend County Women's Center and Rape Crisis in Richmond, Texas, the Association to Aid Victims of Domestic Violence in Santa Clarita, California, and the Critical Incident Stress Management Program of the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office, to name just a few. At the request of a major drilling company in Houston, Sherry focused much of her business, called CISM International, serving the needs of the offshore community in the Gulf of Mexico and around the world in responding to critical incidents. Sherry Cardinal, also known as Miskosikwe, the Red Woman in Ojibwe, is a member of the Red Bear Pembina Chippewa Indians, Adik, Sonagab, Dudem. She a council member and advisor for the hereditary Chief Mitiga Ogichida. Let's welcome Sherry Cardinal. Let's clip this on you. Need to clip this on you.
Good. That's good. Mm-hmm. Anine, I see your spirit, many spirits. Before I begin my presentation, I'm going to speak a song that I created recently. I'm not going to offend you with my singing voice. But here's a song capturing the sorrow and resilience of the Ojibwe people as we face the loss of our homeland, remembering that we're a land-based people. In the land of the lakes and the whispering trees, where the rivers run wild and free, we lived with the earth in harmony. But shadows came and we had to flee. Oh, my heart aches for the homeland where the spirits of my ancestors stand. In the winds, I hear their call. Ojibwe, we rise, though we fall. The treaties were signed and the promises broken. Our lands were taken, our spirits were choked. But in our hearts, the fire still burns for the day when the wheel of fate turns. Through the tears and the pain, we remember the stories of old, the strength of our elders. The spirit of the Ojibwe never leaves. Oh, my heart aches for the homeland. I am Miskosikwe, Nindigo Ojibwe Mo, Gichi Nokoma Sadik Songab Dudem. I also go by Sherry Cardinal, Sherry Rose Cardinal. Okay? I live in two worlds, as many of us do. We live in two worlds, one of which man is at the center, and all around the circle are the trees and the animals and the earth and other people. and man at the center manipulates for his own gain. The Ojibwe way is that everyone is in the circle and no one is at the center. We are all related and we all work together for good so that we can all live the good life. Which world are you walking in? What is a human being? Okay. In my talk today, I am going to go back and forth between my spiritual beliefs and teachings and my clinical social work knowledge, because both pertain to what we're talking about. What is a human being? Okay. And try to represent it by this Venn diagram, the body, soul, and the spirit, and the core self being where they're all joined together. We must remember that Ogi Chagwan, we are a spirit lowered and living in a body. Okay? But most of us live mostly through our body and our soul, which is our mind and our will and our emotions and our personality and our intellect. Okay? We're taught that. Even in psychology, they don't teach spiritual things. I was fortunate enough to go to a college in California to get my master's degree that was run by the Jesuits. And we interwove theology and psychology. So for every psychological principle, we had to know what God's purpose was behind it. So I weave that into my practice, sometimes unknown by my clients of where I'm coming from, but always focused on where they're coming from. And very often, because I'm also an ordained ecumenical pastor, they ask for spiritual teachings. And I do find that clients that will combine the spiritual teachings and the spiritual aspect of their human being heal faster, get well faster than those that don't. That's been well documented now. Okay. So the Venn diagram, I have to get close to this mic, I guess. We live within an environment, the square. That's important, especially to Indigenous people, because we're a land-based people. We're dependent historically on living in harmony with the land. We didn't have grocery stores, okay? In fact, the Ojibwe word for grocery store, bad hunter. That's a joke, there is no. And we have our five physical senses, obviously, touch, taste, sound, sight, hearing, and sound. Sound isn't the same as hearing. Our soul, our will, mind, and emotions, personality, intellect. And up there we have our spirit, which is basically in faith, hope, and love. That's God's nature. And we live every day combined with that in our human nature, in our sense of self and who we are. But what happens when this self, or one of these elements of us, is wounded? We call that trauma. Okay? It can be physical. It can be emotional. It can be spiritual. There's many ways to be traumatized. Okay? But we must understand first and foremost that trauma is first and foremost a physical response. We don't realize that it stems from our nervous system in our brain, and it immediately makes changes in our physiology. That's why post-traumatic stress injury is so difficult to manage, because it changes you physically as well as emotionally and spiritually. Okay. I call it post-traumatic stress injury. Psychology calls it post-traumatic stress disorder. But I haven't been able to figure that. Because if you have a broken leg, they don't call it broken leg disorder. No. Okay? It's an injury. It's something that impacts your being. It's something that interrupts your very sense of self and who you are in the world. Doesn't matter how it happens either. It dismantles.
Should I help you get the page?
Oh.
You've lost the Venn diagram. Oh, give me a
I
moment.
know.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Gives me a chance to breathe. There we go.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Okay.
So the front, if you shut it, it's going to go away.
Yeah,
Well,
just
he
don't
didn't.
shut the lid.
Just stand back. Stand back.
Okay.
Okay. Don't touch. Right? There was a book one time that a Baptist minister had given me when I was in college, and it was when I was trying to study how the body and the spirit, everything combined, and the book was called Please Touch. Okay? And it just came to me right now that that book was important in my life because it helped me to understand that God touches us in many ways. It's important for our understanding to realize the physical again, and I'm reiterating that because we think post-traumatic stress is all in your head. It's not, okay? When it's stored in your body, and maybe some of you can relate to what I'm going to say, is that you will have stomach aches and headaches and sore shoulders and sore hips, some sort of dis-ease. I spread the words out, dis-hyphenated ease, disease. We now know that stress, post-traumatic stress in particular, impacts every organ and every sense of physical nature that we have. And we can't dismiss it. I don't know about you, but when I go to the doctor, they never ask me how I'm doing psychologically. Okay? So they're leaving out several components. They're only looking at your body. And so they treat the symptoms of your post-traumatic stress, of your trauma. And unless and until you get to the root cause of your trauma, you won't find that peace and well-being. And that's what clients say when I ask them, why are you coming to therapy? They say, I need some peace and well-being in my life. Okay? Peace in the Greek, in the New Testament, doesn't mean the absence of war like we think. Doesn't mean the absence of chaos. Peace literally means to be at one with. One is the highest number. We have to even be at one with ourselves, with all aspects of ourselves, not just one or two primarily. Okay? We need to be balanced. It is a question of balance. Any of you Moody Blues fans here? I started listening to their music in my teens, and my favorite song is still A Question of Balance. And I've come to understand that more and more as I searched for how one is the highest number. Okay, I touched the computer. I still didn't want to. We have a thing now in psychology called adverse childhood experiences. Isn't that a pretty name? You can call it abuse, you can call it neglect, okay? You can call it sexualization, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but now they call it adverse childhood experiences. And even though that's sort of a pretty name, it does add into it some things that we normally don't think of as abuse. Okay. In understanding psychology, we have a thing called attachment issues. If you want to look that up, the person that researched all that was a fellow by the name of Bowlby. Okay? And he talked about attachments and what happens when primary caregiver attachments are either broken or unsteady for a child, right from actually conception, as we know now, to birth and after birth. So when a child's ripped from their parents, like Indian children were from theirs, what do you think happens to that attachment? What do you think happens to their sense of trust? Because the first stage of development, according to Erickson, is trust versus mistrust. Okay? And all of a sudden their development stops. Okay? When attachment disorder, as they call it a disorder, okay, happens, the development of the child stops. So think about when the kids were ripped from their parents going to boarding school at young, very young ages. Where do you think their emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual development ended up? Way back at the age that they were taken from their parents. Okay? That's one of the reasons it's so hard and so difficult to treat intergenerational trauma, because it goes back so far, and it's really not accounted for very much. Okay? But we have to understand that even today, David was talking about, our school systems, the boxes we put kids into. Okay? They're taken from their parents. And that, any of you kids, people have a kid with a separation anxiety disorder? I say that just because that's how it's called. Okay? That's a normal reaction to an attachment being torn apart. Okay? So, then kids are diagnosed with ADHD and they're medicated, okay, for that and for other kind of disorders, okay? Prozac Nation, right? Okay? We have lost our sense of connectedness to the earth and to those things that really do heal us. Okay. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of Ojibwe history, and just to illustrate how this trauma has affected generation after generation after generation. Remembering that we are people of the land, and the land and our connection to it was the most important thing to us, and what was one of the first things that happened when the Europeans came over. We were on the East Coast, where I live now, and gradually shifted further and further west. And you can trace the pathways of the trail all around the Great Lakes and out further west. And each time they had to adapt to a new homeland. Okay? Each time they had to leave what they knew and trusted and adapt. The Marines say, improvise, adapt, and overcome. Well, the Ojibwe are champions at that, as are many Indigenous people. So our land base was taken away from us. Trauma number one. Okay. The next thing that happened was what? Intermarriage. Now, I'm kind of a weird thing. Mitika calls me crazy interwoven. I sometimes go by that name. My birth mother's heritage went back to the Mayflower 4 times. Now, I'm not saying that to be hoody-toody. I really don't care. But it matters to a lot of people. And it shows how on one hand, one side of my family came, and we say colonized, but they conquered. I just use the term because it's much more visual than colonization. Okay, they were conquered. And on the other hand, I'm French and Indigenous, what's very often sometimes called Métis. Okay, so this side of my family goes all the way back to France, and I've traced it back 13, 14 generations, thanks to Family Search, by the way. I've used that extensively, and other types of genealogical sites. And they intermarried with the Indigenous because when the French fur traders first came over here, there weren't any women. So they married into Indigenous women and were what they called country wives eventually, as they were moving westward with the fur trade, Hudson's Bay, and all of those companies. I come from a long line of fur traders and buffalo hunters on that side. Okay, so my mixed ancestry kind of gives me a perspective. All of those people fought and killed each other at one time on this continent. One time the English were in charge, and then the French were in charge. Well, the Indigenous were in charge, number one, first of all, okay? But as they became more conquered, I can't, as part of myself, hate one or the other, because I'd be hating myself, okay? And a lot of us, and I'm saying this, have that pain, that hole in your soul where you don't know your ancestors. And the ancestors to the Indigenous were very important, and that's why we get so upset when they dig up graves and other sacred sites like that. The worldview with man at center doesn't understand the sacred and how critical that is to the spirit and the sense of self we have as people. Okay. So part of my work as a therapist is to help restore that. And I do a lot of adoption reunions as well as genealogical searches with people to help them find their true self. Okay? And then as the Indigenous were moved, the Ojibwe, further and further west, they came into contact and territories of other Indigenous. And here we are in Fond du Lac. Okay? Here we are. Now, my home is still in Maine. I live right on the coast. I am so blessed. And here I am in Fond du Lac, where I started this journey Thursday, was where the Ojibwe first started. And here I am now in the land of the lakes and trees. Okay? All of which are my ancestors here. There's this guy standing here. Do you see him? You see this? I called him a young, good-looking buck earlier. See, I see him, not visually, but I can feel his presence, and he's helping me to stand. I can't stand on my own. What's holding me up besides that? Okay. I know when I'm up here and teaching that the ancestors are holding me up. Okay. That's how important it is to know your roots. Anybody remember that old TV show, that series, yeah. Roots? Yeah. Okay. So the land base was taken. We were moved away from our homeland. And then our children were taken. And our spirituality was stolen. And we couldn't speak our languages. And we couldn't do our ceremonies. So all of these disconnections, all of these attachment traumas to the things that were meaningful to our sense of what it is to be a human being, okay, were stripped from us. And we wonder why there's so much illness, disease, psychological disruption, addiction, alcoholism within the Indigenous communities. Because they have the core sense of self has been ripped from them. And part of the healing of trauma is to restore that. And even restoring the land bases. That's why the land back movement is so important. Because how do you keep a culture alive if you take from them the very things that they survived on? Food and water and the animals and the plants and all of the things of the earth that sustain us, even today. Whatever you're eating today came from the earth. Okay? And if we poison the earth, if we continue to poison the waters, where are we going to be left? Okay? The same thing's happening today. As Miniga said, are you the new Indian? Okay? And I think that's an important question. There's a thing called dark psychology. Are any of you familiar with that? It's when they use the principles of psychology, of human attachment and love, for manipulation and personal gain. And it's running rampant at this day. You've all experienced it if you've turned on a light box. You've all experienced it if you've watched what's going on politically in this country. Okay? The recognition that you're all being manipulated through dark psychology. Okay? That's important to know because there's a way out of that. But you have to be diligent and willing to do the work that it takes to heal the trauma that comes from being subject to dark psychology, especially on every day. Look at the parents that were arrested going to PTA meetings. Okay. The government thinks they own you and your children. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but yeah, that's the problem.
Because it's not a theory.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yep. And we have to recognize that. Bless you.
Sorry.
No, bless you. Okay?
Thank you.
So how do we heal all this traumatic impact? Okay? In the 90s, I started studying a science called psychoneuroimmunology. Say that fast 10 times. Okay? But what it was is how the mind, body, and spirit are totally interacting with each other. And so therefore, part of therapy has to account for that. Not just the body, and not just the mind. You've got to take the spiritual in with it. And for the Ojibwe, we use the 7 grandfather teachings, which you've heard a lot about. Courage, respect, wisdom, humility, honesty, love, and truth. And we have to apply those things to ourselves personally in a fearless and thorough inventory. Where have you heard that before? And if you've ever been to AA, okay, you have to be willing to really look inside the darkest places within you. And people hesitate to do that because they don't want to think that they have dark spots, that they have faults. But that's the process of therapy. You have to unlearn what you were told you were and how you're supposed to be, and relearn the truth of yourself, capital S. Okay? There is an ebook that I wrote back in I think about 2000, called The 7 Essential Keys for Peace and Well-Being. And it's an outline of how to do that: self-concept, reflection, awareness, responsibility, acceptance, validation, and actualization. That's the process that leads you to being able to heal the self. Now, it's easy to say. It might take years upon years to accomplish it. Okay? Therapy used to have a bad rep, right? I've been in therapy for 20 years. Well, now they've gone the opposite. We will authorize you 3 visits. What? I can barely get their name, address, and phone number in 3 visits. But I have learned through various techniques how to read people pretty quick. Okay? Through body language and behavioral clues and those types of things. No, I don't do it to everybody every day. Too much. So don't worry about it. I'm not psyching you out. Okay? But there are situations where I have to do that. And especially when I was working with first responders. People don't understand the trauma they face every day. Not only their own, but other people's. Okay? I rode with sheriff's office for nigh on 12 years, on patrol, day, night, and afternoons, and saw what they saw, and it was my job to help them through it. Okay? The same with military. A lot of military clients. I just don't stop at therapy because that doesn't work a lot. I had horses, and we'd have art therapy. They would take tempera paint. I had a little miniature horse that was mostly white, and they would paint their trauma on him, and he would carry it away for them. There are things like that we have to use what the earth gave us for healing. But you don't find that in an office in downtown Houston. Okay? I had a farm, and my clients came to me, and I worked with another program on another farm close by for Afghan and Iraq era veterans with horses and animals and goats and sheep and llamas and cows, actually, to help them ground and take away the trauma. Animals are healers. Animals are healers. And we've lost that. We don't interact with them on a daily basis. Many of you have pets, I'm sure. Why do you have pets? Don't they soothe you? They aggravate you, and we know that. Okay? I have a service dog. His name is Tonka. Okay? He's a miniature rat terrier. He's 10 pounds soaking wet. He loves Mitiga. Okay? I was going to name him Radar because when he was a puppy, he had the biggest ears you ever saw. Okay? But then I observed him, and that's how you name things. You observe who they tell you they are. And my service dog before him were Doberman Pinschers. Okay? Now, this little guy looks like a Doberman. As a matter of fact, he was often mistaken for a Doberman puppy when he was small. Okay? And my Dobermans taught him everything he knows because I would hook them together. Okay? And the little guy would follow the Doberman. He had a parent to teach him the ways. And that's what we should do as parents. It wasn't my intervention that made him what he was. It was his relationship with my other Doberman and him wanting to be one of the big dogs, which he thinks he is. Okay? And it dawned on me, Radar isn't a good name. So I named him Tonka because he's bigger. He's much bigger than a 10-pound dog's. Okay? And not only did he works with me for my post-traumatic injury. I learned through experience. He works with everyone I worked with, veterans, law enforcement, Indigenous. And he's a comfort. And he knows when he feels anxiety rising, his job is to jump in people's laps. He'll scratch on their neck or lick on their neck, if they'll let him, to distract him from whatever it is that they're going through, the anxiety or the reliving at the moment. He's magic. A dog. Will insurance companies pay for him? No. Okay? But he has a job. And I couldn't work without him. So we need the things that are surrounding us as part of our healing process. And I hear people say, oh, what do you mean therapy chickens? I had a whole flock of them. And raised chickens. And people loved watching the circle of life. From a chicken to an egg, which came first. And the little chicks hatching. And they could get to name the chicks. And then I'd give away the roosters and keep the hens. And that was part of the process. That is using nature to heal us. in my practice. I'm not an herbalist. I'm not really good at that stuff, but I use animals a lot as healers. And that's part of what's missing today. And my regalia, we talk about dudems, which are our clans. And our clans are always named after animals, right? My clan is right here. It's the standing reindeer. Over here is the elk. Okay? There's a horse down here. There's a bear up here. There's a wolf up here. And there's other connections that I have to the dudems, to myself, and to others. And this becomes a teaching tool. Where are you from? Who are your ancestors? What do you remember? Okay. One of the things, this is a very mindful thing, I do what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a lot of words that mean learning how to change your mind, okay? Which will then change your behavior. And that's something I learned when I went to college, because we had to do what's called an exegesis. And if you've been to divinity college, you might know what that is. But it's you take a word from the Greek or the Hebrew and you deep dive it to find out what it's really saying. Because the translations we get are very often kind of surface, okay, maybe words. But like the Ojibwe language, the ancient languages had multiple depths of meaning. Okay. So one of the days that I was doing an exegesis for my class, I found the scripture that says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And the Greek word is metanoia. Okay? Metamorphosis is the word that we use today. So if you feel like you're a crawling worm on the earth, just wait. When you do a deep dive into your own self-reflection, you cocoon yourself, you change your mind, and what comes out of it? Yeah. So if you do a deep dive on the word, if you just read the scripture, it's like, well, I got to change my mind. No, it's a transformational process. It doesn't happen quickly. But that's what I do, and that's what I'm preaching to you to do in your own lives. Do a deep dive into your own psyche. If you need help, ask for it, okay? Or go get it. Doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. In fact, my clients always say, well, I'm stupid. No, you're not. Okay? You're wounded. That's a big difference. See yourself as wounded in need of healing and well-being as opposed to needing fixing. Okay? I can't fix anybody. I have to awaken in them their own inner healer, their own spirit, their own body functions, their own nervous system, their own thought processes. And there's many in cognitive therapy, because most of us, have you ever noticed your self-talk? How do you talk to yourself? I'm stupid, oh man. Why did I do that? No, I made a big mistake. If somebody else talked to you like that, what would you tell them? Careful now. You know what you'd tell them. You'd tell them where to go. Okay? But why do we talk to ourselves like that and then wonder why we're not happy? Why we don't have peace and well-being? So a lot of what I do is help people change the way they talk to themselves. Because if you talk to yourself like that, what do you think you hear from Creator? Criticism, right? The fear of God. Well, it doesn't mean to be afraid of God. It means to have reverence for Him and believe what He says. And the other thing we misconstrue, and I see a lot of, it's called codependence in the psychological vernaculars. But what it really is a misconstruing of the first and greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. But we skip the as yourself part. We think it's all about God and our neighbor. I'm a hand talker, so. But we forget that the self comes first. You can't give away what you don't have. You can't keep making withdrawals from your bank account without making deposits. It just doesn't work. And it doesn't work for yourself either or for your children. Okay? So all that's the bad news. What do we do? Do you remember when Elder Saul in the movie was talking about the feather? Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of that just to help you remember. Can somebody bring me the feathers? There's two of them right there on top. That's them, that's one. Yep, I want them both. I was gifted alone this morning from many women of her eagle feather. This one's mine. So I decided, which one should I use? And I said, both. What? One is the highest number, right? So here we have it. Okay. And the illustration of the eagle feather shows us the trail that we need to take for the healing of ourselves individually and our families and our communities, and especially our children, because we have to start teaching our children different. We have to start teaching them the values and the value that they have in their own sense of self. School doesn't do that. It tears it up. Okay? So remember what he was talking about, the feather. I was watching the airplane as I was coming in. And I was watching the flaps on the airplane. Okay? When you're taking off, they're down, and the front part is slightly lifted to get lift. The same with the eagle feather. Okay? This side, which Saul called the male side, is the executioner, the one that executes what needs to be done, or I like to call them the doers. Okay? And that's the male side. This side, which gives direction, okay, is the female side. These are the ones that keep the culture, keep the medicines. Despite what you see on TV, all medicine people are men, right? No. No, mostly women, actually. It's the women. And what we have to do is heal this, first and foremost. We have to heal the relationship between men and women, to put it in equal standing. There's so much misogyny in this country and in the world. Who starts the wars? Who fights the wars? Is it women? Women are the life givers. And we've lost our connection with that. So it's easy to kill and maim and destroy and bomb without thinking. Collateral damage, they call it. Right? So don't take this as being anti-military. I'm not. Both my sons, Mitika and my son Len, had served in the military. Okay? So it's not anti-military. But we need to heal it with the 7 grandfather teachings, to add the spiritual to it, so the men and women can sit in the same circle and have the same authority. I've often wondered, I should ask Mitika this, some of the treaties that were signed by men, whereas the women in our culture were the tribe was matrilineal, which meant that the women held a lot of the rights in the land and the water. Okay? How did the men get to sign it off? Did they ask? I don't know. I need to do a deep dive into that, because that would invalidate a lot of treaties if the wrong people sign them. Okay? Who knows there? But I like to ask these kinds of questions. I'm a curious person. And so I am challenging everybody in this room and everybody watching to begin to heal not only your relationship with yourself, but do a deep dive with your relationship with the other sex. the other gender. Very deep dive. Because unless and until women take their God-ordained place in the world, this chaos is going to continue. That's my prophecy. So, take this as the challenge of the day, and then teach your children the feather teaching as they're growing up, so that they don't fall into the same trap that we've been in. Okay? We have to understand the sacred. That's one of the reasons we're here teaching. That's one of the reasons I teach the feather teaching. Because we're in such a fix that we don't realize what causes it. And it's a question of balance. As I said in the video, without that balance, eagle can't fly. Okay, we're all eagles. We're all spirit. We're all Ojibwe. That plane couldn't fly if those flaps didn't work right? You'd have a crash. We've had lots of crashes. The divorce rate, think about it. Second marriages fail at a higher rate than first marriages. What are we doing? We're not relating properly. We're not giving each other the proper respect that we're due. Okay? So I invite you to meet that challenge. Okay? Put your families back together the way God intended them. And my gift to you in leaving is the ebook. It's on my, wherever the website was, criticalincidentstress.com. It's there for you to download free. It's my gift to you to help you on your journey of finding the balance in your life and in your family's life, to help heal what's happening in this country and in the world. Chimiwich.